I understand, go even beyond the Ryan plan. What are you proposing, and how would you get about it?
Well, Andrea, we are in the early stages of discussion with my colleagues about a plan, and let me say that our plan is going to be, we'll see. It's a work in progress, but I think that Paul Ryan's plan was a terrific plan and a very thoughtful, a visionary plan that was bold and courageous and has very substantive and very constructive reforms of the kind we need. And I think it's just really tragic that the president refuses to engage on a substantive level and instead chose to lash out, give a political speech rather than a substantive speech, and really is choosing not to engage in what is the biggest challenge of our time.
Now, I also want to ask you about Tim Geithner apparently met with Republican leaders and warned them that it is going to be on them, according to a Reuters report out of this meeting today, that it's going to be Republicans' fault if there is a default on the debt, if the debt ceiling isn't raised. And you, at the same time, have proposed, you've talked about going against the debt ceiling. Where do you think we should be on the debt ceiling? Well, how should that vote go?
Let's first stop with the shrill talk that we hear from the administration sometimes and consider the facts. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, 70% of all the spending that the government plans on next year will come in the form of tax revenue, and it takes about 6% of government spending to fully service our debt. So there is no scenario in which we will default on our debt. It was never going to happen. It's not going to happen. No Treasury Secretary would ever choose not to make the payments on our debt and to go into a catastrophic default. So that's certainly not going to happen. The big divide here is between an administration that wants us to raise the debt ceiling with no conditions and no change in policy, and those of us like myself who think we should raise the debt ceiling provided that we have some structural and process reform so that we can finally get spending under control and stop these endless deficits that are going to be a disaster for our country if we continue. That's really the battle.
But correct me if I'm wrong, have you suggested that there are ways to spend, to pay off the bondholders but not pay other accounts? And I think what the Treasury Secretary is saying is that that's akin to paying your mortgage but not paying your credit card bills. That either way, you lose your credit rating and you scare the markets. Whether you have technically defaulted isn't the real issue.
Well, here's the real issue. That analogy, of course, totally obscures the fact that both your mortgage and your credit card are debts that you have incurred. Both are forms of money that you've borrowed and that you owe back to lenders. And my legislation has said, in the event that we don't raise the debt ceiling upon reaching it, the first priority for the Treasury, with the huge resources that are coming in anyway from tax revenue, would be to pay our lenders. So what I am saying is a better form of the analogy is the family that has been living beyond its means and run up huge debt would have to make some tough decisions, like maybe laying off the nanny, maybe not going on an expensive vacation, maybe discontinuing the gardeners who come and cut their grass. Maybe they would have to make some cuts. And that's what I think we need to do right now, instead of what the administration wants, is to just throw them some more credit cards and let them continue spending the way they have been.
Although you could say that right now, with two wars going on and the obvious entitlement issues that are most of the budget and interest on the debt, you don't have that much flexibility. We're not talking about nannies and optional vacations right now. No. We're talking about the real guts of it.
Andrea, this administration and the previous Congress grew the size of government by 25% in 2 years. Massive increases in discretionary spending are what drove most of that. Long term, the problem are the entitlement programs, which is why Paul Ryan deserves so much credit for addressing that and why it's unconscionable that the president refuses to. But no. And by the way, I've never said that we can balance the budget overnight. That's not going to happen. What we need to do is get on a credible and immediate path that gets us to a balance, that gets us back to fiscally sustainable levels. The president has not offered that. We're going to offer that.
And just quickly, where do you stand at this date on the social questions, Planned Parenthood and all the rest that were attached initially to the congressional, the CR that Congress was dealing with and is voting on in the House right now? Do you think that the debt ceiling should be clean, apart from fiscal issues? Should it not have any social riders on it?
My preference is that we address the debt limit and we focus exclusively on mechanisms to get our spending under control, get us on a sustainable fiscal trajectory, because that's the most urgent problem. That is a serious problem, and I don't know what other tool we have to bring that under control. So I think we ought to tie structural process reform, like a balanced budget amendment, like statutory spending caps, to the debt limit increase and focus on those kinds of items.
And did you like the triggers or the controls, the caps that were at least suggested in the outline that the president presented yesterday?
You know, the problem with these triggers is they're a mechanism designed to raise taxes. If you imagine that we're starting to get close to hitting these triggers, which would theoretically call for draconian spending cuts, what Congress is all too likely to do is to say, well, rather than that, if we raise taxes, then we won't have as much of a deficit and we can avoid the trigger. So it's designed to increase taxes. We've already got the president calling for much higher taxes on individual incomes through his Obamacare legislation, and now this. We don't need to go down the road of raising taxes, and that's what this is all about.
President Pat Toomey laying it all out there. Thank you very much. Great to see you, Senator. Right. Thanks for coming out to see us.
Thanks for having me.
And President Obama called the Republican proposal to end Medicare as a defined benefit program an attempt to change the